My name is Emily. I'm 25, and for the longest time I thought that falling for a neighbor was nothing more than a cliché from romantic comedies. I used to laugh at the thought, until the night when the power went out, and I discovered just how thin the wall between our apartments really was. The building I live in is old, the kind of place where the wooden floors groan under the weight of footsteps, and the doors shriek in protest every time you open them. I had grown used to its noises, the restless breathing of its structure. But what unsettled me most in recent months wasn't the house itself. It was the new tenant who moved in next door. He was tall with dark hair that fell into his eyes when he tilted his head, and those eyes. I couldn't look at them for too long without feeling like he might see straight into the parts of me I usually keep hidden. Our encounters were always brief, a polite good evening in the hallway, a faint smile that left me guessing if it meant anything more. And yet behind my own closed door, I found myself listening to his footsteps, his faint laughter over the phone, even the rustle of his movements. Each sound felt like a secret message I was never meant to hear, and still I craved more. Then came the night of the blackout. The corridor was swallowed in darkness, the air strangely still, when a soft knock came at my door. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then opened it, and there he was, holding a single candle. The flickering light painted his features in gold and shadow, making him look almost unreal. "Would you like some company until they fix it?" he asked. His voice was steady, calm, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match that composure. Something warmer, more dangerous. I let him in. We sat together at my small kitchen table, the candle between us throwing playful shadows on the walls. Our conversation was ordinary. Books he was reading, the dull stories of my job, little things that didn't matter. And yet, with every glance he gave me, it felt as though he was peeling back the surface of my words, seeing something deeper. A sudden gust of wind struck the window, making me jump. Before I could laugh it off, his hand rested lightly on my shoulder. Nothing more, just the weight of his touch, warm and steady, lingering a fraction too long. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was nothing, but the silence between us disagreed. We sat there as the candle burned lower, the shadows deepening around us. In that quiet, unspoken space, there was everything: temptation, promise, and the dangerous edge of crossing a line we both pretended didn't exist. By morning, I knew we would pass in the hallway again, smiling politely as though nothing had happened. But something had shifted. After that night, every sound through the wall felt different. His footsteps no longer sounded like mere movements. They carried weight, intention, a presence I couldn't ignore. And that's when I realized the most dangerous stories are the ones that begin when you discover the wall between you was only ever an illusion. The next morning felt heavier than most, though the sky was clear and bright. Sunlight spilled through the curtains of my kitchen, touching the empty spot on the table where the candle had burned itself out. For a moment, I stared at that patch of wood as if it still carried a shadow. I tried to go about my routine, coffee, toast, brushing my hair into something neat before work, but my mind wouldn't settle. Every motion was haunted by the memory of his hand on my shoulder, by the heat that had lingered far longer than it should have. When I opened my door to leave, fate betrayed me. He was there, locking his own apartment. The hallway was flooded with morning light, and he didn't look like the stranger bathed in candle glow from the night before. He looked ordinary. Jeans, a simple shirt, tousled hair. Yet the sight of him still twisted something low in my stomach. "Morning," he said, his voice casual, almost too casual. "Good morning," I replied, trying to sound the same. For a heartbeat, we both hesitated, as if last night was standing silently between us, demanding acknowledgement. Then he gave a small smile, polite, restrained, and walked past me down the stairs. Just like that, the moment evaporated. At work, I couldn't focus. My coworkers' chatter blurred into white noise. The glow of my computer screen seemed too harsh. I found myself doodling absent shapes on sticky notes, thinking of him, of the candlelight, of the way his eyes had locked onto mine. That evening, I returned home with a strange mix of dread and anticipation. I paused outside my door, listening. Through the wall, Faint sounds of movement reached me. A cupboard closing, water running, then silence. I told myself not to care, not to read into it, but my body betrayed me. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes, listening as if his life was a secret I could absorb through plaster and paint. Later that night, as I sat curled up with a book, a soft thump came from the other side of the wall, then a low laugh. His laugh. It made my chest tighten in ways I couldn't explain. I imagined him in his living room, perhaps watching something, perhaps talking to someone. And though I had never dared to before, I found myself whispering into the silence, as if he could somehow hear me through the wall. "I can hear you too." Of course, there was no reply, just the hum of the old building, the creak of its beams settling. But from that night on, the wall between us no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a thread, pulling tighter with every sound that crossed it. I went to sleep that night with a strange certainty. This was not over. The days that followed were almost unbearable in their normalcy. We passed each other in the hallway like courteous strangers, sharing small smiles, polite nods, and words that carried no weight. And yet, beneath that thin surface, there was a current, steady, unspoken, undeniable. One evening, as I came home from work with grocery bags in both hands, I found him standing at his door, fiddling with his keys. For once, instead of giving me that fleeting smile and retreating, he paused. "Need some help?" he asked, noticing me struggling. I tried to laugh it off, insisting I was fine, but he stepped forward anyway, taking one of the heavier bags with ease. His fingers brushed mine, and though it was such a small contact, it made my breath catch. We walked to my door together, the silence stretching between us, thick with something neither of us dared name. After I unlocked the door and reached for the bag, he didn't hand it over right away. He lingered, studying me with those unsettling eyes. Actually, he started, hesitating. "I was going to make dinner tonight. Would you maybe want to join me?" My heart slammed against my ribs. It was such a simple invitation, casual on the surface, but everything about his tone told me it wasn't casual at all. I almost said no out of reflex, to protect myself, to keep things safe. But the word that left my lips was yes. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but something deeper. 7 o'clock? I nodded. 7. Back in my apartment, I set the groceries down and leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. My reflection in the window looked almost foreign. Flushed cheeks, wide eyes, the faint trace of a smile tugging at my lips. As the minutes ticked closer to 7, I found myself worrying about ridiculous things. What should I wear? Would he think I was trying too hard? Would it even matter? When I finally knocked on his door, my palms were damp. He opened it immediately, as if he'd been waiting right behind it. The smell of something rich and warm drifted out: garlic, herbs, wine. His apartment was dimly lit, cozy, and it struck me how different it felt from mine. His space had character, a kind of quiet strength like him. "Come in," he said softly. I stepped inside, and for the first time, the wall between us wasn't there at all. His apartment felt strangely familiar, though I had never set foot inside before. It mirrored mine in structure, same narrow hallway, same creaking floorboards, yet it carried a different weight. The walls were lined with bookshelves, the lighting soft and warm, and there was music playing quietly in the background, the kind you almost don't notice until silence makes it obvious. The table was already set for two. A bottle of wine stood open, glasses half filled, as though he had known I would say yes. That thought sent a shiver through me, equal parts unease and anticipation. "Make yourself at home," he said, moving with an easy grace as he checked the pan on the stove. "I don't usually cook for people, so forgive me if it's terrible." The smell told me otherwise. Garlic, rosemary, and something slow-cooked that clung to the air like a promise. I sat at the table, letting my eyes wander. There were books stacked in uneven towers, photographs tucked into frames, a jacket thrown carelessly over the back of a chair. Yet, despite the lived-in feel, there was a strange precision to it all, as though every object had its place, even in its messiness. "Do you live alone?" I asked, breaking the silence. He turned to me, those dark eyes catching the light. Yes. Always have. A pause. And you? I nodded. Just me. The corners of his mouth curved faintly, but he didn't press further. Instead, he brought the plates over, setting one before me. His hand brushed mine again, deliberately I thought this time. We ate, and the conversation flowed easily enough. Books, music, the building's quirks. But every now and then, his gaze would linger on me, longer than polite, sharper than casual. It was the kind of look that stripped away small talk, leaving the air heavy with what neither of us dared to say. At one point I asked, half teasing, "So, what brought you to this building?" His fork paused, just briefly, an almost imperceptible hesitation, before he answered. Needed a change. That was all. No details, no anecdotes. Just a vague reply that felt more like a wall than an answer. I let it go, though the curiosity lodged itself in me like a thorn. Instead, I raised my glass, and he mirrored me. The wine was smooth, dark, and the silence between us deepened as we drank. By the time dessert, simple fruit, nothing elaborate, was finished, I felt the night pressing close around us, the same way it had when the candle burned in my kitchen. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the door. For a moment, neither of us moved. His hand rested lightly on the frame above me, his body close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "Thank you for inviting me," I whispered back. And just when I thought he might close the distance between us, he stepped back, giving me space to slip into the hallway. My pulse thundered in my ears all the way back to my apartment. Behind my own door, I leaned against it, dizzy with the realization. Something had begun tonight. Something we couldn't pretend away anymore. The days after our dinner felt heavier, charged with something that hovered just out of reach. When I passed him in the hallway, his eyes lingered on me for a second too long, and I caught myself holding my breath, waiting for words that never came. At night, my apartment didn't feel quite the same. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was alive, threaded with faint sounds from the other side of the wall. Sometimes it was his laughter, low and rare. Other times, the scrape of a chair, the rhythm of his footsteps. I listened in spite of myself, each noise winding tighter around me. One night, long after midnight, I woke to a sound I couldn't place. Not footsteps, not laughter. Something softer, a voice. His voice. I pressed my ear against the wall, my heartbeat loud in my chest. He was speaking, but not to me. The words were muffled, half-swallowed, impossible to fully understand. It sounded like a conversation, though I never heard another voice answer. Then silence. I pulled back quickly, as though he might somehow know I'd been listening. Lying in the dark, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a late-night phone call, maybe a recording. But a part of me refused to believe it. The next morning, we crossed paths at the mailboxes. His expression was calm, unreadable, as if nothing unusual had happened. But when his eyes met mine, I had the unsettling feeling that he knew, that he could tell I'd been listening. "Sleep well?" he asked casually, sliding a letter into his pocket. The question was innocent enough, yet the weight of it made my stomach twist. I forced a smile. "Mostly." He studied me for a heartbeat longer than necessary before nodding and walking away. That night, the wall between us felt thinner than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfolding quietly, like a secret pressed into the cracks of the old building. And I knew this much. Whatever it was, I was already too deep to step back. The following evening, the summer heat clung stubbornly to the building, making the walls feel suffocating. I opened my small balcony door to let the air in, though all it brought was the faint hum of the city and the heavy scent of asphalt still warm from the day. As I leaned against the railing, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Just beyond the dividing wall of the balconies, he stepped outside, a glass of wine in his hand, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair a little untidy as though he'd been running his hands through it. For a moment, we both froze, two neighbors suddenly caught in the same fragile pocket of night. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, carrying easily across the narrow gap. "Not with this heat," I replied. He smiled faintly, then leaned on his railing, mirroring me. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick, charged, like the pause before storm breaks. Strange thing about this building, he said after a while, his gaze drifting toward the dark sky. You think you're alone, but you're not. The walls, they remember everything. The words sent a chill through me, though his tone was casual. I searched for something light to say back, but instead, I asked, "Is that why you came here? To be not alone?" His eyes flicked to mine, sharp and searching before softening. Maybe. We stood like that for what felt like forever. Two people suspended in a fragile balance, the city humming quietly below. At one point, his hand brushed over the top of the dividing wall, just inches from where mine rested. The space between us shrank until it was nothing more than a breath, a choice. I thought he might reach for me then, cross that invisible line. But instead, he pulled back slightly, lifting his glass as if to toast. "To sleepless nights," he said softly. I raised my own glass of water, clinking it against the air between us. To sleepless nights. The following evening, the summer heat clung stubbornly to the building, making the walls feel suffocating. I opened my small balcony door to let the air in, though all it brought was the faint hum of the city and the heavy scent of asphalt still warm from the day. As I leaned against the railing, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Just beyond the dividing wall of the balconies, he stepped outside, a glass of wine in his hand, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair a little untidy, as though he'd been running his hands through it. For a moment, we both froze, two neighbors suddenly caught in the same fragile pocket of night. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, carrying easily across the narrow gap. "Not with this heat," I replied. He smiled faintly, then leaned on his railing, mirroring me. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick, charged like the pause before a storm breaks. "Strange thing about this building," he said after a while, his gaze drifting toward the dark sky. "You think you're alone, but you're not. The walls, they remember everything." The words sent a chill through me, though his tone was casual. I searched for something light to say back, but instead, I asked, "Is that why you came here? To be not alone?" His eyes flicked to mine, sharp and searching before softening. Maybe. We stood like that for what felt like forever, two people suspended in a fragile balance, the city humming quietly below. At one point, his hand brushed over the top of the dividing wall, just inches from where mine rested. The space between us shrank until it was nothing more than a breath, a choice. I thought he might reach for me then, cross that invisible line. But instead, he pulled back slightly, lifting his glass as if to toast. "To sleepless nights," he said softly. I raised my own glass of water, clinking it against the air between us. To sleepless nights. When I finally went back inside, I lingered at the door, my hand resting on the frame. My body buzzed with a mixture of longing and unease. Because I couldn't decide which was stronger anymore, the way he drew me in or the way his words clung to me long after he was gone. The tension between us had been building for weeks, subtle but impossible to ignore. Each encounter, each fleeting touch through the balcony or the brief brush of his hand in the hallway, left me restless long after he had gone. I could feel it in my chest, a mix of anticipation, curiosity, and something darker, something I couldn't name. That night, the power flickered again, and I found myself holding my phone like a lifeline, unsure if I should text him or pretend nothing had changed. A soft knock interrupted my indecision. It was him. The familiar candlelight in his hand cast shadows that danced across the walls, painting him as both familiar and unknown. "Mind if I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside wordlessly, and he entered, setting the candle on my kitchen counter. The room seemed smaller, warmer, more intimate under its flicker. We sat across from each other, the air charged with words unsaid. For a long time, we didn't speak, simply listening to the faint hum of the building settling around us. Finally, I broke the silence. I keep thinking about you, about us, about this." My voice trembled, not with fear, but with the sheer weight of admitting what had been simmering for weeks. His gaze held mine, steady, unreadable. And then, slowly, a smile curved at the edge of his lips. Not the polite smile of a neighbor, but something warmer, more dangerous. "I was hoping you'd say that," he murmured, "because I've been feeling the same. I just didn't want to rush it. Didn't want to scare you." Relief and desire collided in my chest. My hand moved, almost of its own accord, resting lightly on the edge of the table. His fingers followed, brushing mine in a tentative but deliberate touch. The candle flickered between us, shadows playing across our faces, making it impossible to tell where one of us ended and the other began. For a moment, the world outside, the building, the city, even the walls themselves, ceased to exist. There was only him, only me, only the fragile thread of connection that had been pulling us together since that first blackout. And in that suspended moment, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. There was no going back. The air between us that night was thick with tension, warm and electric, a charge that made it impossible to think clearly. Every glance, every subtle shift of weight, carried the weight of weeks of quiet longing. I couldn't stop myself from leaning forward, just slightly, and he mirrored me. The candlelight flickered across his face, making his eyes gleam in ways I couldn't resist. My hand brushed against his, lingering longer than necessary, and he didn't pull away. Then, as if drawn by the same unspoken current, our faces came closer. The space between us vanished, replaced by the soft, intoxicating heat of proximity. My heart raced so fast I could feel it in my throat, and for one suspended second, I thought the world might shatter if I moved too quickly. And then he kissed me. It was gentle at first, exploratory, almost shy, a kiss that asked questions rather than demanded answers. But underneath, it was a strength, a certainty, the kind of kiss that makes you forget everything else. I pressed closer, letting go of caution, of hesitation, of all the little rules I had kept myself trapped by. Time seemed to slow. The candle burned lower, shadows stretching across the walls, casting patterns that danced around us. I could feel the heat of him, the warmth of his hand on my back, the slow, steady rhythm of his heartbeat through the briefest touch. When we finally pulled back, just slightly, our foreheads rested against each other, and we both laughed softly, a shared, breathless sound that was equal parts relief and wonder. "I wanted to do that for a long time," he murmured, his lips brushing my temple. "Me too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The night outside continued, indifferent to us, but inside, the space between our apartments, the walls, the doors, the old creaks and groans, felt utterly irrelevant. There was only this connection, fragile and new, and yet impossibly strong. And as I finally went to my own apartment, leaning against the door with my heart still racing, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The illusion of distance between us was gone. There would be no pretending from now on. The nights after our first kiss were different. I could hear him through the wall, yes, but now it wasn't just footsteps or laughter. Sometimes there were whispers, soft, low, almost like a conversation he was having with someone who wasn't there. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself it was imagination or maybe a phone call muffled through the plaster. But the more nights passed, the more I noticed a pattern. There were pauses, moments when the sound of his voice seemed to tremble, then stop abruptly, as if he had realized I was listening. One evening, curiosity overpowered caution. I pressed my ear to the wall, listening more intently than ever. "Don't let her see," he muttered, almost a growl. My stomach dropped. I pulled back, heart hammering. Was I imagining things? Was it real? Could it be someone else? The next day, I found myself pacing my apartment, replaying the words over and over. I wanted to confront him, to ask, to demand the truth. But fear held me back. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe in the warmth and intimacy we'd discovered. But something had shifted. That night, I almost didn't answer when he knocked at my door. But curiosity won again. He stepped inside, the familiar calm in his expression, though the flicker of something unspoken lingered in his eyes. I could feel it, the tension of secrets, of things hidden behind the polite veneer he wore in the hallways. "Emily," he said softly, "we need to talk." And in that moment, I realized that the walls between us weren't just gone. They had been concealing something I wasn't ready for. He closed the door behind him, and for a moment, the apartment felt impossibly small. The candlelight, the same fragile, flickering warmth that had witnessed our first kiss, threw long shadows across the walls. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice steady but low, weighted with a seriousness I hadn't heard before. "Something about me, about why I moved here." My chest tightened. I braced myself, unsure if I wanted the truth or if I feared it. He took a deep breath. I work nights, late night shifts, different schedules. But more than that, I've been keeping someone under my care. Someone who isn't quite able to live alone yet." My mind raced. Someone? Was this why he sometimes muttered in the dark? Why there were whispers I couldn't place? "It's nothing dangerous," he said quickly, reading the alarm in my eyes. "Just someone I promised to help. And I didn't want to lie to you, but I also didn't want to scare you off." I processed his words slowly, letting the tension ebb. Relief began to replace fear, though a flicker of unease remained. "You could have told me sooner," I said softly. "I know," he admitted. "I wanted to trust that we could navigate this together." I studied him, this man who had become more than a neighbor, more than a presence behind a thin wall. He had been honest now, and that honesty, flawed, complicated, human, was enough. I stepped closer, brushing my hand against his. "Then let's figure it out. Together." A slow smile spread across his face, one that reached his eyes, lighting them in a way no candle ever could. "Together," he echoed. For the first time since the blackout, the walls between our apartments, the ones we had imagined, the ones that had seemed to define us, felt truly gone. Not just the physical wall, but the barriers of fear, hesitation, and unspoken longing. And as we sat close that night, the candle burning low between us, I realized that sometimes the most dangerous stories, the ones that start with the thinnest walls, can also be the most beautiful if you dare to cross the line. Because the illusion of distance had vanished, leaving only the undeniable truth. We were no longer neighbors. We were something far closer, far more real, and entirely ours.